My paper examines how the past functions within the construction. It's not on. Here we go. Okay. Thank you. My paper examines how the past functions within the construction of Palestinian national identity. Often we take this connection between the past and the present somewhat for granted, but we don't seriously consider how these elements integrate and function together. I will start with a brief discussion of the theories underpinning the linkages between heritage and identity. From here I will share one case study that I collected during fieldwork from Palestine that I conducted between 2004 and 2006. Finally, I will offer a few brief conclusions. Nationalism as a form of collective identity or nationness is not a fixed reality based on natural boundaries or historical unity. Rather, this form of collective identity is an imagined or forced production by populations searching for means to distinguish themselves from other populations bound within a nation-state structure. The power of these imagined collective identities can be demonstrated by the fact that most individuals within such a grouping will never meet their fellow members, yet in their minds, each lives the imagination of their shared identity. This collective identity, and for that matter, collective memory, is the result of an active process of construction on behalf of the community itself and the individuals who comprise that, community. Much of a community's life becomes involved in defining a collective story of common origins that serves to transcend the particular biography of each individual in favor for the group narrative. The past provides the symbolic and iconic elements that nations and communities latch onto in order to substantiate their constructed collective identities, memories, and history.
Few, please. So as to translate. Yes, شوي.
Archaeological and cultural heritage is but one tool used to foster and construct collective identities and collective memories of the past. It is argued that the close ties between collective identity, collective memory, and cultural heritage is based upon the demands of communities searching for evidence to support the existence of a widely accepted past that is perpetually learned and propagated. The role of research focused on cultural heritage, specifically in terms of collective identity, has several uses, the most important pertaining to how it legitimizes the territorial boundaries of the community and subsequently affirms a sense of collective identity within these legitimized territorial boundaries. The majority of nationalist traditions in cultural heritage research, which Dr. Taha's presentation yesterday touched briefly on, are oriented towards the construction of collective identities at the nation-state level and function to provide a cohesive agent for these populations. The struggle to connect contemporary communities with historical and heritage legacy becomes bound within an essentially political process of decisions, calculations, and negotiations that strive to manipulate the past in such a manner so that it provides the ideological and existential justifications for action in the here and now. The broader nexus between politics and science is inhabited by disciplines dedicated to the study of the past because they serve the state or the nation as managers of historical knowledge, narrative, and prestige. In particular, the utilization of cultural heritage is beneficial to nation states because they are often uniquely situated for processing and possessing the necessary apparati to support the requisite services of elite specialists, in this case, archaeologists or cultural heritage managers. As a mechanism for producing collective history and identity, heritage research is crucial in establishing the links between modern populations and the territories they inhabit. Once established boundaries are defined, then specific populations can claim ownership to particular parcels of land. legitimizing these territorial boundaries is particularly vital for populations struggling to connect with lands that hold cultural, social, or religious significance. Typically, these communities attempt to create a master commemorative narrative highlighting a commonality of the past and legitimizing aspirations for shared territory and destiny. The successive strata uncovered in archaeological excavations becomes the proof of national authenticity and a powerful instrument for rediscovering and recreating the evolving nation. Thus, histories and prehistories focused on building collective identities serves to instill a uniform sense of pride, morale, and identity within the population. Competing accounts of the past, particularly those bound within the same territory, are written or heard at particular moments in time and addressed to a known audience that has certain expectations regarding the construction of that narrative. Therefore, the construction of identity narratives is not a static process, isolated from current political and social struggles. Rather, narratives are actively defined and redefined in order to meet the needs of contemporary communities. The archaeologist Christopher Tilley argues that the past is not in any sense immobile or fixed, or written indelibly. Rather, it is something to be strategically reconstructed in relation to contemporary social and historical conditions, to be actively reinterpreted and reinscribed within the present social order. More specifically, identity narrative construction is not simply a recording of what happened in the transition of one state of affairs to another, but a progressive redescription of sets of events in such a way as to dismantle an original structure and to justify an alternative recording of it at a later point. As such, narrative construction, augmented through cultural heritage research, becomes a social and political action of the present mediated upon the past. This active and dynamic process alters the reality of historic and cultural heritage research from a stable, positivist, or scientific endeavor meant to produce objective, knowable truths to a fluid interpretive action that can shape and modify contemporary social and political realities. The case study I will talk about is the attempt to connect the Palestinian heritage with the heritage of the Canaanites. Albert Glock, the former director of the Albright Institute of Archaeological Research in Jerusalem and head of the Institute of Archaeology at Birzeit University from 1976 until 1992, struggled with the problem of how to connect the contemporary Palestinian population with historical and ultimately prehistoric communities. For Glock, the most fruitful and scholarly path for identifying and tracing cultural continuities was by using the Palestinian oral tradition as a starting point and subsequently working backwards through historical and cultural elements. The idea was that he would eventually arrive at a pre-Islamic Palestinian cultural reality. As he argued, quote, where continuity of the present with the past is a reasonable assumption, elements of the deeper past are still alive in traditional village and public buildings, subsistence systems, and social organization. Glock and his ideological successors believed that Palestinian heritage connections are best determined by accessing the knowledge of the living population in order to begin the process of exploring the past. However, as Palestinian archaeological theory and practice grew in the 1980s and 1990s, alternative methods for exposing Palestinian cultural continuities began to appear and rejected the inherent preconception that a viable pre-Islamic Palestinian cultural connection was a legitimate narrative. Rather than working from the present to the past, these alternative methods began from the premise that Palestinians have an intrinsic and deep historical presence in the land that dates to the pre-Islamic periods. Yet these alternative narratives are often dismissed as overtly political propaganda, or in the words of one critic, quote, lying in the realm of popular imagination and folklore. Palestinian archaeologists have begun attempt to construct narratives that acknowledge a legitimate continuity of Palestinian culture in the land of Israel and Palestine that dates to pre-Islamic periods. In 1998, Jalal Kazo of the Department of Archaeology at Al-Najad National University excavated 2 Canaanite-era dwellings dating to approximately 3000 BC at the site of Tel Safar, located just west of Nablus. This created a controversy because he argued that these remains were the historic and cultural patrimony of the Palestinian people. The interpretation of the Canaanite archaeological remains was a mechanism by which the contemporary Palestinian community could assert its historical legitimacy and heritage in the land. According to Kazo, the archaeological interpretations, quote, establish Palestinian roots in this land. We are saying that these are our ancestors and these are our roots. Kazo recognizes the political implications of Palestinian Canaanite archaeological research and claims that these interpretations of Palestinian historical continuity are, quote, the biggest challenge to others, i.e. the Israelis, who say that this is their land and that they have the historic right to it. Furthermore, the dean of Al-Najah University at the time went further to state that, quote, we hope in the future we make more discoveries to disprove Israeli claims that they have the right to this land. In the case of Tel Safar, the ability to incorporate the historical Canaanite community into the narrative of the contemporary Palestinian community became an act of political resistance against the weight of the Israeli heritage narrative that is too often viewed as diminishing the legitimacy of the Palestinian presence in the land, both in a historic and modern context. In addition to Palestinian intellectuals actively building associations between Canaanites and Palestinians, the Palestinian public at large is also beginning to seek a deeper Palestinian history by arguing that their presence in Palestine, in terms of cultural continuity, dates from the Bronze and early Iron Ages. While the case for a Canaanite-Palestinian cultural association may be possible, the fact remains that there is insufficient archaeological data and evidence to robustly support and defend this interpretation. Despite the best effort of Palestinian cultural heritage professionals, the inability of Palestinians to have widespread control and management over the full corpus of cultural heritage materials in Palestine has undermined their ability to produce such interpretations with the support of sufficient data. Palestinian archaeologists often claim that the monopolization of archaeological research in Palestine by Israeli, European, and American archaeologists has resulted in the neglect and at times outright destruction of archaeological evidence that does not fit within the prevailing Judeo-Christian biblical narrative. Therefore, the effort to associate the modern Palestinian communities with the ancient Canaanite communities is a decidedly political endeavor designed to prove that designed to provide the Palestinians with a counterweight against the Israeli narrative that registers the Jewish presence in Palestine at the time of the biblical exodus from Egypt. The perceived power of this narrative is that it supersedes the Israeli origin narrative and provides a mechanism by which Palestinians can claim original ownership, occupation, and heritage in the land of Palestine. The Canaanite-Palestinian narrative essentially provides Palestinians with a mnemonic and political tool to combat Israeli claims to a deeper, more profound connection with the land. Conceptions of national origin and history have, over the course of the conflict, become mythical, homogenized, and geared towards the legitimization of temporal priority and territorial aspirations. The result is that answers to the questions of how, why, and when a nation comes into existence are not esoteric matters to be dealt with merely in theoretical or philosophical abstractions. Instead, based on the research and interpretation of archaeological and cultural heritage, they become weighty forces that can be manipulated for political advantage. Yasser Arafat once declared, quote, "Our forefathers, the Canaanites and Jebusites, built the cities and planted the land. They built the monumental city of Jerusalem. However, despite the tempting political advantage a Palestinian Canaanite narrative might provide, there is not universal agreement within Palestinian society concerning the appropriateness of advocating a Palestinian cultural association with the Canaanites. While touring the city of Hebron, I posed this question to Khalid, a highly educated Hebronite who moonlighted as a tour guide. Khalid politely listened to my question, and as I detailed how some Palestinian scholars advocate the connection between Palestinians and Canaanites, while some foreign academics claim that this is propaganda or myth. After a short pause, Khalid smiled slightly and said, "Palestinians and Canaanites," I will not say exactly what he said, but he said that it is ridiculous. When I pressed him why he didn't believe this, he explained as follows. "You know what Abu Ammar did with saying that we belong to the Canaanites? He did that to make the Israelis angry. He thought if we could say that we were here just like they were, then we are on the same level. But you know, there isn't anything that proves this, and I think it's just political. And does it really matter? We are here now." A Palestinian colleague involved with a heritage awareness program in the West Bank recounted how he encountered friction from several members of the local school board when discussing this very issue. According to Marwan, the problem was that the program dealt with pre-Islamic eras. Quote, "There are some people who think that times before Islam are ignorant and wicked. They do not want their children to be learning about these things." Throughout other conversations with Palestinians, similar sentiments concerning the Palestinian-Canaanite relationship were occasionally echoed. However, rather than the more forceful disdain expressed by Khalid or the more direct discussion with Marwan, the subject was merely skirted by redirecting the conversation towards post-Islamic eras of history. Overall, two major reservations were expressed concerning the Palestinian-Canaanite relationship: the lack of evidence and a general discomfort among some with associating Palestinians with a pre-Islamic culture. To conclude quickly, as with the rest of the world, the politics of cultural heritage will never fade from Palestine. The politicization of the past is not a choice. It is a reality that archaeologists, cultural heritage professionals, governments, and local communities must come to grips with in order to effectively manage the material culture of the past. The postmodernist perspectives of the past have enabled archaeologists and cultural heritage professionals to confront this inherent politicization of history and heritage resulting from the construction of narratives that avoid uncomplicated, linear histories of peoples and states in favor of exploring smaller sub-state, extra-state, and interstate movements. Rather than simply providing ancient fuel to the fire of land claims, ethnic superiority, and historical images, engaging the essential politics of the past connects cultural heritage research with other disciplines in academia, and more importantly, with wider communities at large. Ignoring the politics of archaeological and cultural heritage research, or dismissively stereotyping these approaches as adding an element of confusion to an already chaotic world of interpretive schemes, this only works to empower those who manipulate archaeological and cultural heritage for their political purposes. Archaeological and cultural heritage research cannot be depoliticized, and to do so would deny that the past is actively and strategically reconstructed in relation to contemporary social and historical conditions for the benefit of the current order. Finally, in the future, an adequate body of research and scholarship on Palestinian historical and heritage narratives exist and provide a solid foundation upon which to support these claims. However, at this point in time, there's greater need for the Palestinian narrative of history and heritage to be constructed by Palestinians themselves, which I believe we are seeing here at this conference. These Palestinian constructed heritage narratives are essentially reclamations of the Palestinian past. No longer is the past purely occupied or expropriated by foreign powers or interests. Instead, it is a mechanism for Palestinian political self-realization and collective identity construction. Thank you.